Lebanon's energy minister has blamed a national fuel crisis on profiteers who are smuggling gasoline into neighbouring Syria. Raymond Bashar said the gap in prices between the two countries meant that smugglers were making huge profits. Lebanon is in the grips of its worst financial crisis in decades. The caretaker finance minister warned this month that Lebanon would run out of money to fund basic imports by the end of May. And in neighbouring Syria, the economy is also collapsing after a decade of war and Western sanctions on the Assad regime. Well, for more, I'm joined by our senior reporter, James André. He's been to the border with Lebanon and Syria. And James, you saw for yourself the extent of the smuggling that is going on there, didn't you?
Yes, absolutely. With Mayssa, Awad, we went to the border. We actually crossed briefly into Syria to see how this system works. And yes, what we did see was that there are very large quantities of goods and commodities that are, for most of them, subsidized by the Lebanese government, who are being smuggled into Syria. Here is a little piece of what we saw, because we have a long report for you that we had this weekend.
At the end of this road, a first Syrian flag appears, along with soldiers loyal to Bashar al-Assad's government.
That's the Syrian army. We call them the Hijane. They're policing the border.
There is no checkpoint, not even a signpost, but we've just left Lebanese soil and entered Syrian territory. This road that runs along the canal is one of the border's most active smuggling hotspots. The flow of motorcycles and tinted-windowed SUVs appears never-ending opposite the Syrian army's positions, placed every few hundred meters. The border is closed because of the coronavirus pandemic, and Western powers have imposed sanctions on Syria. The United States are enforcing the Caesar bill that bans all transactions with entities linked to Bashar al-Assad or his entourage. Officially, nothing is supposed to cross the border. Sheikh Amar takes us to a plot of land he owns along the canal.
I'm taking you right onto the border. You'll see the smuggling for yourself. Let's get there before the smugglers run off. That's the Assi River. It's also the border between Lebanon and Syria. And look, you can see the Syrian border guard. There's an operation taking place over there on the bridge. The cars park, and they load them up.
The smugglers have spotted our camera.
Stop filming.
All right, so a little glimpse into your report there. But tell us a bit, how is this smuggling affecting ordinary people in Lebanon?
Well, it is affecting them a lot because, in fact, Lebanon is in crisis. Now, the crisis is not all to blame on the smuggling. I mean, there are a range of problems that have hit Lebanon in recent months, and that includes, financial meltdown, the fact that the neighboring country Syria has been at war for 10 years. There is the coronavirus, of course. There's been capital flight, but there is this smuggling problem. And indeed, people were going hungry, and the Lebanese pound has completely crashed against the dollar. The levels of inflations have been massive. Basically, the minimum wage, which used to be worth around $450 back mid-2019, is now worth about $60, because everything is imported into the country. So people were having difficulties anyway. And a year ago, the government decided to subsidize some products, basic products, rice, pasta, but also fuel, petrol, diesel. And indeed, well, experts consider now that 60% of the subsidized fuel, petrol and diesel, is being sent over the border to Syria, because there's nothing in Syria. The country is under an embargo, an international embargo, indeed sanctions against Bashar al-Assad, and the economy is completely destroyed. So people are willing to pay more money over the border, and this is a kind of a scheme by which the traffickers rip the state off this subsidy money, and that's $500 million a month, a lot of which crosses the border directly into the neighboring country and does not profit to the people of Lebanon.
And the Lebanese taxpayer funding all of this, of course. And in what way is this smuggling helping to shore up the regime of Bashar al-Assad?
Well, the regime of Bashar al-Assad is, of course, in a dire situation. It is isolated, it is embargoed, there is the Caesar law, which we just heard about. This is, there is a very, very strong set of sanctions which is in place in order to cripple the economy and to sanction Bashar al-Assad. Now, what's happening is that this trafficking, of course, because these are massive quantities, is helping the regime get by. It means that there is fuel, it means that there are commodities coming in through an illegal means that are uncontrolled, and that, of course, is helping the regime. And this is also being done with the complicity, in a way, or at least with Hezbollah and Amal, which are the Shiite parties who Hezbollah actually backed Bashar al-Assad militarily during the crisis in Syria. Well, we went to see them when we talked to them, and they say, well, indeed, trafficking is normal given the circumstances, and normal given the sanctions, and that means, of course, a part of the Lebanese political class is not interested in stopping this trafficking. So, indeed, that does mean that a part of the Lebanese economy is being diverted to Syria and not profiting to the Lebanese people, but indeed, in a way, backing the Assad regime. And that means that given the massive crisis that is hitting the country, well, Western powers, or, for example, Sunni allies of Lebanon, such as, for example, Saudi Arabia or others, do not want to inject cash into this flailing economy because they know a large chunk of that cash is just going to go right across the border to help a regime they're trying to sanction.
All right. It's a fascinating report. And if you'd like to see that in full, it is called Lebanon-Syria, Smuggling and Sanctions, the New Frontline. James and Mayssa Awad's report can be seen here on France 24 at 9:15 Paris time on Saturday evening. Or you can also go to our website and just look under reporters and you will see it there as well. James, André, thank you very much indeed. And that is it from the newsroom for now. Do stay tuned. This is France 24.